going to be able to push forward the more meaningful structural reforms, which will be able to ensure and sustain its economic growth in the longer run, not just in the next 2 years, but in the next 5 to 20 years.
I see. One stone, three birds, Professor?
I am a very conservative person. I really
You haven't explained last time what conservative means,
especially
but
when
anyway.
I talk about those three birds. I mean, look at the GDP growth rate at 6.5% for this year. I believe that is achievable. But for next 5 years, 6.5 on average, I have a question mark.
One final angle we need to tackle before we go is about the communication and transparency. Earlier, all of you mentioned the world is watching China on a daily basis and probably on an hourly basis. And however, some of the information about Chinese economy, terminologies about the Chinese economy, new policies toward the future, may not necessarily be that easily understood by the rest of the world, at least not the traders every day on the floor. So they are looking at China's financial market, in a way, even the capital market, to look for clues about where China is going. And that's where the danger comes from. You can't just watch the market and say China is going into whatever direction. But on the other hand, the policymakers, they also need to establish confidence without interfering in the daily operation of the capital market, for example. That's a very delicate balance to be done, Professor Zhu.
Yeah, I think from the 18th plenum of the party, I think there is a very strong voice that we should have the market play a maximum role or decisive role in allocating resources. And in capital markets, I think the most important piece of resources is risk. And how could we allow the market to play its role in determining the price of risk? So in my newly published book, China's Guaranteed Bubble, I think we say, well, the government has to leave certain bad things to happen. Only the risk itself can alert or can warn investors that they have to pay more attention to what they're doing. I think we have a lot of Chinese domestic investors, even though they do not know too much about finance or investment, they walk into the financial markets without worrying too much about their losses. Why? Because they believe the market is not fully functioning. The government is going to bail them out eventually. It's that belief that is actually scaring away many of the international investors, because they wouldn't know what are the rules they will be playing by if something bad really happens.
We do notice, Mr. Ross, that Liu Shiyu, the head of the Security Regulatory Commission, after talking about circuit breaker and many of the policies that his regulation commission is likely to move on to, did advise, shall we use the word, investors. Bear in mind, Chinese investors are mainly small-scale investors, individuals, and probably middle-sized investors. So he's talking about people should bear in mind the risks of the equity market. So, Mr. Ross, how long do you think that will take for China to establish that culture, the culture of understanding the market will play a decisive role, and let the market play a decisive role, even for small individual investors?
Well, I'm afraid I think it will take a very long time, and in a certain sense I don't think it will ever happen. Because the key thing about mature capital markets is they're not dominated by small retail investors who play a rather small role within it. They're dominated by big institutional investors. And the big institutional investors have the resources to do the research, to do the statistics, etc., to deal with the situation. So it's still a sign of the immaturity of China's capital markets, and it's still dominated by retail investors. So it really takes an institutional, structural position, because no individual, even somebody who's an economist, has all the facilities to undertake research on what's happening on the stock market, whereas a big investment banker or somebody can. So it needs maturation in the market itself.
Professor Huo, briefly?
Until the Chinese financial market is open to everybody, to the rest of the world, before that, stock market is going to be dominated by the small individual family household investors, and that's going to take a long time for that situation to change.
I see. Professor Zhu, final words.
And I also think we have to have the little guys realize they're not very good investors. In the U.S., I mean, investors lose a lot of money, and over 20 years they gradually exit the market. In China, we should have them realize their shortcomings as well.
And to let them have the learning curve.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Zhu Ning, Huo Deming, and also John Ross. Gentlemen, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.